Have you ever had a moment where you felt the entire world was watching you fall apart? Sarah Martinez stood frozen in the middle of SaveMart grocery store in downtown Phoenix, Arizona, her hands trembling as she stared at the cashier's screen. The total glared back at her like an accusation. $67.43. Her wallet held exactly $23 behind her. A line of impatient customers shifted their weight, checking their phones, sighing audibly. Her 7-year-old daughter, Emma, clutched a box of cereal, the cheap kind, store brand, while her 5-year-old son, Lucas, pressed his face against her leg, sensing something was wrong. "Ma'am," the cashier's voice cut through the fog in Sarah's mind. "Do you need me to remove some items?" Sarah's throat tightened. She looked down at the conveyor belt. Pasta, rice, bread, peanut butter, milk, eggs. Nothing extravagant. Nothing unnecessary, just survival. Her voice cracked. "I can pay you back. Tomorrow, I promise. I get paid tomorrow." The cashier, a young woman barely out of her teens, looked genuinely sympathetic but helpless. "I'm sorry, I can't do that." "Store policy." Sarah felt the heat rising to her cheeks. The whispers behind her grew louder. Someone muttered something about people like that and planning ahead. Emma tugged on her mother's worn jacket. "Mommy, are we going to eat tonight?" That question, innocent, desperate, heartbreaking, shattered something inside Sarah. She had been holding it together for so long, 3 months since the divorce. 2 months since she lost her job as a receptionist when the dental office downsized. 6 weeks since she'd been living in her cousin's garage, sleeping on an air mattress with both kids curled up beside her. Every day was a calculation, a negotiation with desperation. Today, she had finally gotten a call back for a job interview. A good one. Administrative assistant at a law firm. But she needed to feed her children first. She needed them to have something in their stomachs before the babysitter picked them up. She needed to not feel like a complete failure for just one day. "Please," Sarah whispered, tears now streaming down her face. "I'm not trying to steal. I need to feed my kids. Just until tomorrow. I swear I'll come back." The cashier looked torn, glancing nervously toward the manager's office. That's when she heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, authoritative. Sarah turned to see a young security guard approaching. He couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, wearing a crisp uniform that still had the new job's stiffness to it. His name tag read Marcus Johnson. His face was set in that neutral, professional expression that service workers wear when they have to do something they don't want to do. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." Sarah's heart plummeted. "No, please. I was just explaining—" "Store policy," Marcus interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "You can't make purchases without payment. I need you to leave the items and exit the store." Emma started crying. Lucas buried his face deeper into his mother's leg. The other customers were definitely watching now, some with pity, others with judgment, a few recording on their phones. Sarah felt the humiliation wash over her in waves. This was it. This was rock bottom. Being escorted out of a grocery store in front of her children because she couldn't afford $67 worth of basic necessities. "Can I just—" she started, reaching for the milk, thinking maybe she could at least buy that with the money she had. "Ma'am," Marcus's voice was more insistent now. "Please step away from the register." Something in his tone made Sarah realize he wasn't going to negotiate. Rules were rules. She was a problem that needed to be removed. With shaking hands, she gathered Emma and Lucas. "Come on, babies. We have to go." "But Mommy, I'm hungry," Lucas whimpered. Those 3 words nearly broke her completely. As she turned to leave, trying to hold on to what little dignity she had left, Marcus gently but firmly placed his hand on her arm. "This way, ma'am." And that's when everything changed. Instead of escorting her toward the exit, Marcus guided her away from the registers, away from the prying eyes and phone cameras, toward a quiet corner near the pharmacy section. Sarah braced herself for the lecture, or worse, for him to call the actual police, but when they stopped, and Marcus turned to face her, his expression had completely transformed. His jaw was clenched. His eyes, which had been so professional moments ago, were now glistening with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry I had to do that." Sarah stared at him. Confused, Marcus took a shaky breath. And when he spoke again, his words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them back for too long. 20 years ago, my mom stood in this exact same store. Not this location, but a SaveMart just like it. She had 2 kids with her, me and my sister. She was trying to buy groceries with money she didn't have. And when she couldn't pay, the security guard, his voice cracked. The security guard dragged her out. Not gently, not with any kind of understanding. He treated her like a criminal in front of everyone. In front of me. I was 3 years old, and I remember being in her arms, watching people stare at us like we were trash. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Marcus wiped his eyes quickly, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. I had to remove you. This is my first day on the job. My first day. If I didn't follow protocol, I'd be fired before my shift even ended. But His voice broke completely. I couldn't let them humiliate you like that. Not in front of your kids. Not like what happened to my mom. Sarah didn't know what to say. The pain in this young man's eyes was so raw, so genuine. I'm sorry, he repeated. I'm sorry I couldn't help more. I'm sorry the world works this way. Before Sarah could respond, before she could tell him she understood, they both heard a voice behind them. Excuse me. They turned to find an older man standing there. He was tall, probably in his late 60s, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in a grocery store. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his presence commanded attention without him having to demand it. Sarah had no idea who he was. Marcus clearly didn't either, but the man's eyes were fixed on both of them with an intensity that made Sarah's heart race. I heard everything, the man said quietly. Every single word. Marcus went pale. Sir, I was just... Follow me, the man interrupted. Both of you, please. It wasn't a request. Sarah looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Sarah. Emma and Lucas pressed closer to their mother, sensing the tension. The man turned and began walking toward the back of the store, past the employees-only doors. Sarah's mind raced. Who was this man? What did he want? Was Marcus about to lose his job because of her? Was she about to be arrested after all? But something in the man's voice, something gentle beneath the authority, made her follow. Marcus walked beside her, his face etched with worry. They passed through the storage area, boxes of inventory stacked high on industrial shelves. The man led them up a flight of stairs Sarah didn't even know existed. At the top was a door with a simple gold plaque. Executive office. The man opened it and gestured for them to enter. The office was nothing like Sarah expected. It was elegant but not ostentatious. Large windows overlooked the Phoenix skyline. Framed photos lined the walls. Pictures of grocery stores, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, community events. And then Sarah saw it, a larger photo behind the desk. The same man, younger, standing in front of the very first SaveMart location, dated 1982. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just some manager. This was the owner, the founder of the entire SaveMart chain. Richard Chen, the billionaire who had built an empire, starting from a single-family grocery store. And he had heard everything. Marcus looked like he might pass out. Richard Chen closed the door behind them and walked around to his desk, but he didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against it, studying both of them with those sharp, knowing eyes. Sit, he said gently, gesturing to the chairs in front of his desk. Sarah sank into one, pulling Emma and Lucas close. Marcus sat rigidly, looking like he was waiting for an execution. Richard Chen folded his arms, and then, to everyone's shock, he smiled. Young man, he said, looking at Marcus. What's your name? Marcus Johnson, sir. Marcus Johnson? Richard repeated it slowly like he was committing it to memory. Today is your first day working for SaveMart, correct? Yes, sir. And you escorted this woman out of the checkout area because you were afraid of losing your job if you didn't follow protocol. It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded miserably. Richard turned to Sarah. And you, ma'am. What's your name? Sarah Martinez. Sarah Martinez. He nodded. You came to my store to buy groceries for your children. You were short on money. You offered to pay tomorrow. And you were humiliated in front of your kids because we, as a company, enforce a rigid payment policy without consideration for human circumstances. Sarah didn't know how to respond to that. Richard Chen pushed off the desk and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. The silence stretched. Emma whispered, Mommy, are we in trouble? Shh, baby, Sarah murmured, though she didn't know the answer. Finally, Richard turned back to them. 43 years ago, I was a poor immigrant kid from Taiwan, he said, his voice heavy with memory. My parents came to America with nothing. My father worked 3 jobs. My mother cleaned houses. We lived in a one-room apartment in Los Angeles, and there were nights when there was no food. He paused, his eyes distant. I remember my mother taking me to a grocery store when I was 7. She tried to buy bread and milk with the few coins she had saved. It wasn't enough. The manager screamed at her in front of everyone, told her to get out, called her a thief for trying to scam him. I watched my mother cry as we walked home empty-handed. Sarah's heart clenched. That moment changed my life, Richard continued. I swore that if I ever had the power to build something, it would be a place where people were treated with dignity, where compassion mattered as much as profit. He looked directly at Marcus. You did your job today. You followed the rules because you were scared. But you also did something else. You showed humanity. You pulled this woman aside not to humiliate her further, but to offer her something more valuable than money. Understanding. Marcus's eyes widened. Richard turned to Sarah. And you, Ms. Martinez, are trying to survive in a system that makes survival harder than it should be. You love your children. You're fighting for them. And no one should ever be humiliated for that. He walked back to his desk and picked up his phone, pressing a button. Janet, clear my afternoon schedule, and call David Rodriguez. Tell him I need him here immediately. He hung up and looked at both of them. Here's what's going to happen next. Sarah's hands were trembling so hard she had to clasp them together in her lap. Emma and Lucas sat quietly, sensing the weight of the moment. Marcus looked like he was holding his breath. Richard Chen sat down behind his desk, his expression unreadable. Marcus, he began. You've worked for SaveMart for exactly, he glanced at his watch, 4 hours. In those 4 hours, you demonstrated something most people never learn in an entire career. You showed that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. Marcus blinked. Sir, I don't understand. You will? Richard opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. How old are you? 23, sir. Education. I just graduated from Arizona State, business management. But I couldn't find a job in my field, so I took this security position to pay my student loans. Richard nodded slowly. And what would you do if you had the power to change how this company treats people like Ms. Martinez? Marcus hesitated. I'd create a program. Something like a community fund where people could get emergency assistance, or a payment plan system. Something that doesn't humiliate people who are just trying to survive. Richard's eyes gleamed. Interesting. What else? I'd train employees differently, Marcus continued, gaining confidence. Not just on policy, but on empathy. On recognizing when someone needs help instead of punishment. And if you were in charge of multiple stores, how would you implement that? Marcus stopped, realizing the trajectory of the conversation. Sir, are you... Ms. Martinez. Richard turned to Sarah. What did you do before you lost your job? Sarah's voice was hoarse. I was a receptionist at a dental office. But I also did their HR work, scheduling, hiring, inventory management. I basically ran the office. Why did you lose your job? They downsized. Automated most of what I did. The bitterness in her voice was impossible to hide. And what would you do if you had the resources to help other people in your situation? Sarah looked down at her children. I'd hire them. I'd find the single mothers, the people recovering from hardship, the ones everyone else overlooks because they have gaps in their resume or they're too risky. I'd give them a chance like someone should have given me. Richard Chen stood up and walked to the window again, his back to them. I built SaveMart on a principle, he said quietly. Take care of your people, and they'll take care of your customers. Take care of your customers, and they'll take care of your business. But somewhere along the way, as we grew to 847 stores across the western United States, we lost that. We became corporate, cold, efficient. He turned around, and there was fire in his eyes. I didn't overhear you two by accident. I come to different stores unannounced every week, walking around like a regular customer, listening, watching, seeing what my company has really become. Sarah's heart was pounding. What I heard today was the first sign of humanity I've witnessed in months, Richard continued. Marcus, you reminded me why I started this company. Sarah, you reminded me who we're supposed to serve. There was a knock on the door. Come in, Richard called. A man in his 50s entered, wearing a sharp business suit. He had the efficient air of someone who managed important things. David, Richard said, this is Marcus Johnson and Sarah Martinez. They're going to need contracts. David raised his eyebrows but pulled out a tablet. What kind of contracts, sir? Richard looked at Marcus. Marcus Johnson, as of this moment, you are no longer a security guard. You are the Director of Community Relations and Employee Development for SaveMart's Western region. Your job is to create and implement the exact programs you just described to me. You'll oversee 312 stores. You report directly to me. Your starting salary is $175,000 annually, plus benefits and performance bonuses. Marcus's mouth fell open. What? Sir, I can't. You can and you will, Richard said firmly. You have the education, the empathy, and the vision. The rest you'll learn, he turned to Sarah. Ms. Martinez, I need someone to help Marcus identify and hire people who have been overlooked by traditional employment systems. You'll be the director of alternative workforce development. Your job is to find people like you, people who fell through the cracks, and bring them into SaveMart. Same region as Marcus, same salary, same benefits. Sarah couldn't breathe. This can't be real. It's very real, Richard said. David, also arranged for Ms. Martinez to receive a 1-year grocery allowance. Unlimited purchases at any SaveMart location. Make sure her account is flagged so no cashier ever questions it. Emma tugged on Sarah's sleeve. Mommy, is the nice man helping us? Sarah burst into tears. Richard Chen walked over and knelt down in front of Emma and Lucas. What are your names? I'm Emma. He's Lucas, Emma said shyly. Well, Emma and Lucas, your mommy is one of the bravest people I've ever met. And she's going to help a lot of other mommies and daddies now. How does that sound? Lucas, who hadn't spoken since they entered the office, looked up with wide eyes. Will we have food tonight? Richard's expression softened. You'll have food every night, I promise. He stood up and addressed all of them. This isn't charity. This is business. Good business. The kind of business I should have been doing all along. David was already typing rapidly on his tablet. I'll have the contracts ready by tomorrow morning. We'll need to process background checks, set up direct deposits, and expedite everything, Richard interrupted. I want them starting next week. Marcus finally found his voice. Sir, why are you doing this? Richard Chen smiled, and for a moment, he looked young again. Because 43 years ago, someone refused to help my mother when she needed it most. And I swore that if I ever had the power to change that, I would. He walked back to his desk and pulled out a business card, handing one to Marcus and one to Sarah. This is my direct line. You call me anytime. You have questions, concerns, ideas, anything. You're not just employees. You're the conscience of this company now. Sarah stared at the card, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to say. Say you'll make me proud, Richard replied. Say you'll help me fix what I broke. I will, Sarah whispered. I promise, Marcus wiped his eyes. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. I know you won't. Richard extended his hand to both of them. Welcome to SaveMart. The real SaveMart. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of her new office. A real office with her name on the door. And still couldn't quite believe it was real. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind. Contract signing, training, moving out of her cousin's garage and into an actual apartment with separate bedrooms for the kids. Emma and Lucas were enrolled in a better school. There was food in the refrigerator. Not just food, good food. For the first time in months, Sarah had slept through the night without waking up in a panic about bills. But more than that, she had purpose again. Marcus knocked on her office doorframe. Ready for the site visit? They had been traveling to different SaveMart locations, interviewing managers, talking to employees, identifying problems and opportunities. Marcus was a natural leader, thoughtful, compassionate, but with a spine of steel when it came to defending his vision. Ready, Sarah said, grabbing her bag. As they walked through the parking lot, Marcus said, I still can't believe this is my life now. Me neither, Sarah admitted. My mom cried when I told her, Marcus said quietly. She remembered that day at the grocery store when I was 3. She's carried that shame for 20 years. And now I get to tell her that it led to this. Sarah touched his arm. You're going to change so many lives, Marcus. We're going to change lives, he corrected. This is a team effort. They visited 3 stores that day. At each one, Sarah interviewed potential hires, people who had been rejected by traditional employers, a woman recovering from addiction who hadn't worked in 5 years, a man recently released from prison trying to rebuild his life, a teenage mother who dropped out of high school but was brilliant with numbers. At each store, Marcus met with managers and staff, introducing new protocols. Instead of immediately escalating to security when someone couldn't pay, cashiers now had the authority to offer payment plans or connect people with local assistance programs. By the end of the day, Sarah had identified 7 potential hires. Marcus had trained 53 employees on the new empathy protocols. As they drove back to headquarters, Marcus turned to her. Do you think we're actually making a difference? Before Sarah could answer, her phone rang. It was Richard Chen. Sarah, turn on the news. Channel 12. She pulled up the news app on her phone. The headline made her gasp. SaveMart revolutionizes retail. Billionaire CEO introduces second chance hiring program and customer compassion initiative. The news anchor was interviewing Richard Chen, who sat calmly in the same office where Sarah and Marcus's lives had changed 3 weeks ago. Mr. Chen, critics say this is just a publicity stunt. What do you say to that? Richard's expression was serene. I say watch what happens over the next year. We're not just changing policy, we're changing culture. And if it works, and I believe it will, I challenge every other major retailer in America to do the same. And what inspired this dramatic shift? Richard smiled. I was reminded that behind every transaction, every policy, every rule, there are real people with real lives. We forgot that. It was time to remember. The interviewer pressed, there are reports that you personally hired 2 people on the spot after witnessing an incident at one of your stores. Is that true? It is. And they're the best hires I've made in 40 years. Sarah's hands shook as she held the phone. Marcus pulled the car over, his eyes wide. The interview continued. You're 69 years old, Mr. Chen. Many expected you to retire soon. Instead, you're launching the most ambitious initiative of your career. Why now? Richard Chen looked directly into the camera. Because I'm running out of time to fix my mistakes. And because 2 people I met reminded me that it's never too late to become who you were supposed to be. 6 months later, the conference room at SaveMart headquarters was packed. Regional managers from all 847 stores had flown in for the quarterly review. Sarah stood at the front of the room with Marcus, both of them holding presentation remotes. On the screen behind them, data graphs showed the results of their programs. Marcus spoke first. In the past 6 months, customer satisfaction scores have increased by 34% across all implementing stores. Employee retention is up 41%. And perhaps most significantly, we've seen a 22% increase in overall sales. Sarah clicked to the next slide. We've hired 847 people through the Second Chance program, 1 for every store. These aren't just any hires. These are people who were unemployed for an average of 18 months. People who had been rejected by an average of 47 employers before we gave them a chance. She clicked again. And here's what happened. Their performance ratings are 12% higher than our traditional hires. Their loyalty scores are off the charts. And the community response has been overwhelming. A regional manager raised his hand. What about the financial assistance program? How many people have abused it? Marcus fielded that one. In 6 months, we've extended emergency payment plans to 12,483 customers across all stores. The repayment rate is 94%. That's higher than most credit card companies. Another manager spoke up. I was skeptical at first, I'll admit it. But I've seen the change in my store. Employees are happier. Customers are more loyal. We've had 3 local news stories about people we've helped. This is working. Richard Chen, sitting in the back of the room, said nothing. But he was smiling. After the presentation, as people filed out for a break, Richard approached Sarah and Marcus. Walk with me, he said. They followed him out onto the balcony overlooking downtown Phoenix. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. I'm 70 years old next month, Richard said. I've been thinking about succession planning. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. I have children, Richard continued, but none of them want to run SaveMart. They have their own lives, their own careers. And honestly, I think this company needs something they can't provide. He turned to face them. It needs people who understand what it means to struggle, who remember what it's like to be overlooked, who lead with their hearts as much as their heads. Marcus's eyes widened. Sir, are you saying? I'm saying that in 5 years, when I fully retire, I want you 2 to take over, Richard said. Co-CEOs? Marcus handling operations and culture. Sarah handling people and community. Together. Sarah couldn't speak. You have 5 years to learn everything you need to know, Richard continued. I'll mentor you personally, and when the time comes, SaveMart will be in the hands of people who actually understand its mission. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Marcus said honestly. You're not, Richard agreed. But you will be. And more importantly, you care. That's more valuable than any business degree. He put a hand on each of their shoulders. You 2 took a moment of desperation and turned it into a revolution. Imagine what you can do with 5 years and the resources of a $1 billion company behind you. Sarah finally found her voice. Why us? Richard smiled. Because 6 months ago, I overheard a young security guard show compassion when it would have been easier to follow rules. And I watched a mother fight for her children's dignity with the last shred of strength she had. That's the kind of people I want running my company. The kind who never forget what really matters. 2 years later, Emma was 10 now, flourishing in school. Lucas was 7, obsessed with dinosaurs and building things. Sarah had bought them a house. A real house with a yard and their own rooms, but the best part wasn't the house or the stable income or even her title as Chief People Officer of SaveMart. The best part was the letters. Every week, Sarah received dozens of letters from people whose lives had been changed by the Second Chance program. Single mothers who found jobs, formerly incarcerated people who found redemption, addicts who found purpose. Each letter was a reminder that the worst day of her life had become the catalyst for the best thing she'd ever done. Marcus had similar stories. Employees who wrote to thank him for training managers to see them as human beings. Customers who shared how the new payment assistance program had saved them during a crisis. Together, Sarah and Marcus had built something neither of them could have imagined that day in the grocery store. One afternoon, Sarah was in her office when her assistant knocked. "Ms. Martinez, there's someone here to see you." She says it's personal. An older woman walked in, maybe in her 60s, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked. "Are you Sarah Martinez, the one who runs the Second Chance program?" "I am." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "My son is Marcus Johnson." Sarah stood up immediately. "Mrs. Johnson, it's so wonderful to finally meet you." "I had to come thank you personally," Marcus's mother said. 20 years ago, I went through the worst humiliation of my life in a grocery store, and I thought that moment defined me. Defined my son?" She wiped her eyes. "But Marcus told me everything. How you were going through the same thing. How Mr. Chen heard it all. And now, look at what you've built together. Your son is one of the best people I've ever worked with," Sarah said sincerely. "He gets that from his father," Mrs. Johnson said. "We always taught him to remember where he came from, to never forget what it feels like to struggle." They talked for an hour. Mrs. Johnson shared stories of young Marcus, of the years of poverty and hardship, of clawing their way to stability. When she left, Sarah sat in her office for a long time, thinking. That evening, she picked up Emma and Lucas from their after-school program. As they drove home, Emma asked, "Mommy, do you ever think about that day at the grocery store?" Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror. "I think about it every day, baby." "Are you sad when you think about it?" "No," Sarah said honestly. "I'm grateful." "Grateful? But you were so sad that day." "I know, but that day taught me something important. It taught me that our lowest moments can become our greatest transformations. That sometimes we have to break completely before we can rebuild into something stronger." Lucas piped up from his car seat. "Is that why you help people now?" Sarah smiled. "Exactly why, Lucas." That night, after putting the kids to bed, Sarah sat on her back porch with a cup of tea. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Did you see the news? 2 more retail chains are adopting programs like ours." "We're actually changing the industry," Sarah typed back. "We're changing more than the industry. We're changing how people see each other." Marcus replied, "Mr. Chen would be proud." Sarah smiled. Richard Chen had officially retired last month, though he still called them weekly to check in and offer advice. At his retirement party, he had pulled Sarah and Marcus aside. "Remember the day we met?" "How could we forget?" Marcus had said, "I told you that you reminded me why I started SaveMart. But I never told you the rest of the story." They had leaned in, curious. "The day after my mother was humiliated in that grocery store, she sat me down. I was 7 years old. And she said, 'Richard, always remember, how you treat people when they have nothing tells them everything about who you are.'" His eyes had glistened with tears. "I built a billion-dollar company, but I forgot my mother's most important lesson. Until you two reminded me." Now, sitting on her porch, Sarah thought about all the mothers struggling in grocery stores, in parking lots, in quiet, desperate moments all across the country. She thought about all the Marcus Johnsons out there, young people trying to do the right thing in impossible situations. And she thought about all the Richard Chens, people with power and resources who had forgotten their own struggles. Change was possible. Transformation was real. All it took was one person, willing to show compassion when it would be easier to follow rules. One person willing to remember. 5. Years after that day in the grocery store, Sarah Martinez and Marcus Johnson stood together at a podium in front of 3,000 SaveMart employees. The annual company conference had grown massive as SaveMart expanded to 1,200 stores across the United States. Behind them, a screen displayed the new company logo. Beneath the familiar SaveMart name were 3 words: people first, always. Marcus spoke into the microphone. 5 years ago, I was a scared kid on his first day of work. I thought following rules was the same thing as doing what's right. Sarah continued. 5 years ago, I was a single mother who couldn't afford to feed her children. I thought my value as a person was measured by the balance in my bank account. Together, they said, we were both wrong. The audience applauded. Sarah went on. Today, SaveMart employs 12,000 people through our Second Chance program. We've assisted over 100,000 customers through our financial hardship program, and we've inspired 47 other major retailers to adopt similar initiatives, Marcus added. But more than that, we've proven that compassion and profit aren't opposites. They're partners. When you take care of people, they take care of your business. The screen behind them changed to show photos. Sarah and her kids on the first day of school. Marcus and his mother at his college graduation. He'd gone back for his MBA. Richard Chen surrounded by employees at dozens of store openings. Our founder, Richard Chen, taught us something invaluable, Sarah said. He taught us that it's never too late to become who you're supposed to be. That your past doesn't define your future. That one moment of compassion can change everything. The final slide appeared. It was a photo from that day 5 years ago. Grainy security camera footage of Marcus leading Sarah away from the register the moment before everything changed. This is where it started, Marcus said. With a moment of shared pain, shared memory, shared humanity, Sarah's voice grew stronger. And this is where it continues. Every single day. Every time one of you chooses empathy over efficiency, connection over convenience, people over policy, the audience rose in a standing ovation. After the presentation, Sarah and Marcus stood in the hallway, exhausted but exhilarated. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Mr. Chen hadn't been there that day? Marcus asked. Sarah shook her head. I used to, but I don't anymore. Why not? Because I think we would have found our way somehow. Maybe not as fast, maybe not as dramatically, but good people find each other eventually. And when they do, they change the world. Marcus smiled. That's very optimistic. I learned it from a security guard who cried when he had to enforce a rule he knew was wrong, Sarah said. He taught me that hope isn't naive. It's radical. They walked toward the exit together, ready to head home to their families. Behind them, employees streamed out of the conference hall, energized and inspired. Among them were single mothers starting their first day of work. Formerly incarcerated people getting a second chance, immigrants building new lives, young people like Marcus once was, learning that compassion matters more than compliance. Sarah and Marcus stopped in the empty hallway, the echo of the ovation still thumping in their chests. She squeezed his hand, trembling. 5 years, Sarah whispered, voice breaking. 5 years ago, I was sobbing because I couldn't buy milk for my kids. Today, look at this. Marcus swallowed hard, eyes brimming. My mom's in the audience. She took the bus alone. Said she had to see with her own eyes what that day at SaveMart became. From the end of the corridor, a frail figure approached. Marcus's mother, clutching a tissue, tears streaming. She stopped in front of them, touched her son's face, then Sarah's. You gave me back the dignity they stole from me 20 years ago, she said, voice cracking. Thank you for turning my shame into pride. Sarah collapsed. She cried like she did at the register, but now from relief, from triumph, from love. Marcus pulled her in, and the 3 of them stood there. 3 generations bound by one single act of humanity. On the stage, the screen still showed the grainy photo. Marcus guiding Sarah away from the humiliation. Below, in simple letters, the caption Richard Chen had asked for before retiring. Sometimes the world changes when someone simply refuses to let another person drown alone. Sarah lifted her gaze and saw Emma and Lucas in the front row, waving signs, Mommy is the best CEO in the world. And she cried even harder because the ending wasn't a title. It was a hug. It was knowing no mother would ever walk out of a SaveMart empty-handed again. It was the certainty that, in that exact second, across 1,200 stores, 1,200 registers, and 200 security guards, someone was choosing kindness. And that was enough. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove the human heart is still the greatest revolution. Rapido.